Good morning, councillors. Good morning, Catherine and Trudy. Nice to meet you down the end there. We've got this presentation, the overview of outcomes reporting. We've got a briefing from 10:15 to 11 o'clock. So I'll hand it right over to Catherine to start us off. And how do you want to run it? Do you want to go through the full presentation and then questions, or would you like questions throughout the presentation?
The presentation's relatively short, so feel free to interrupt, but probably if we run it through, then that might be useful. So.
Okay, excellent. Well, we'll leave it up to you, and then we'll see how we go.
So the reason good morning, councillors. The reason we're bringing you this today is because we haven't really talked to you much about the outcomes reporting since we set up the impact framework in 2023. And if you cast your mind back to 2023, you refreshed the strategic direction towards the beginning of the year, and then we started a conversation with you about setting up an impact framework, which was really driven by a desire, I think, both from yourselves and also from staff, to be able to really demonstrate what a difference that this organisation was making to some outcomes and the aspirations that you had articulated in the strategic direction. So it was driven by a desire to set up a framework that was actually helped us talk about the progress that we were making for the community and for the environment. It's the impact framework's used across government, and you will have seen in health and other areas where they've set up impact frameworks with outcomes and thank you, Trudy. Where they've set up sort of outcome statements around health and that sort of thing, and you've probably seen how difficult it is to actually measure progress towards those outcomes. So what we wanted to do today was just to take you back to the time that you set the strategic direction with the vision and aspirations, and then we had some workshops with you around outcome statements, which at the time were described as the impact that we want to see on the community. What outcomes are we contributing to? And they're enduring long-term. They won't be achieved in 1 or 2 years, but there are things that we really want to commit to and help the organisation drive towards. So that's really the subject that Trudy's going to talk to a little bit when I finish doing the intro bit. And we set up some outcome measures as part of that. In the lead up to this long-term plan, we set up the core service delivery model. And as part of that, we set up the service measures, which were set out in the long-term plan, and you've been seeing the reporting on those service levels, which is actually what are staff doing day to day, week to week, that's making that we're actually delivering stuff. And so you're seeing that come through in the quarterly reporting, which is coming through the Regional Delivery Committee, as a bit of an assurance piece for you that what we said we were doing, we are doing, and the next quarterly report will come through in May. We've also been looking at how we deliver the core services and make sure that the work that staff are doing, they can see a line of sight through to the service measures, the outcomes measures, and ultimately the vision and aspirations that the council has set through its strategic direction. So from a staff perspective, it's really useful to help see the alignment between the work that we do on the ground, the services that we're delivering, the outcomes that we're contributing to, and the vision and the aspiration that leads to. So it's a very useful construct for staff, as well as I hope it's a useful construct for you. It was designed to be enduring, and I think as Trudy talks through some of the methodology, you'll see that it's not the work of a minute to achieve the outcomes, and the Auditor General provides some guidance about what it is, but it's also, in that quote, you can see the outcomes sought provide the rationale for the range of outputs. So it is that link between what you want to achieve and what you're actually doing. He also said it can be challenging, and for many outcomes, it's a long causal chain in which you play a part in many years. So I think I just wanted to set that context before Trudy, who's been working with the team across the organisation to work out how we actually set up these outcome measures so we can actually provide you with some thoughts on how we're progressing towards them. So at this, I'll hand to Trudy.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Kia ora, good morning, councillors. Excellent. Well, look, I'd really just like to reiterate the impact framework that we've developed here. It's the overarching, enduring structure that helps us to define, measure and communicate the difference our work's making for our environment and our communities. As Catherine said, it's intended to help us focus our efforts to maximise positive outcomes for the environment and community. It provides a clear link between what we do, the services we provide, and the outcomes or the long-term change that we want to see. It provides us a way to measure and report on our success, and it helps us see how our work is contributing to the bigger picture. Breaking down to the levels, we have 18 outcomes which describe the enduring changes we want for our environment and our communities. They're aspirational, as Catherine said, they're long-term, and they require contributions from many to realise the intended outcomes. We've chosen outcomes that we can influence and contribute to, but we're not solely responsible for achieving these ourselves. To measure the change in each outcome, we've got 25 outcome measures and targets, and these will be the subject of our outcomes reporting. I think I'll just take a moment here to distinguish the difference between outcome measures and service measures. So to measure the performance of our core services, we have 34 service measures and targets. And the service measures represent the service standards that we've set for our community. We have annual targets and we provide quarterly updates to the Regional Delivery Committee on our progress and report the annual performance in the annual report. And while our day-to-day work is contributing to improved outcomes, we won't see rapid changes in the outcome measures, so it's not appropriate to be doing quarterly reporting on the outcomes. At this stage, I'll redirect your attention to the handout that's on your tables there. So this is a double-sided handout. On one side, we've got the full list of our outcomes, outcome measures and targets. And on the other side, which I'll spend a little bit of time talking about, is this matrix diagram. So this shows the services along the top there, organised by our 3 core services, and how they contribute to the 18 outcomes on the left-hand side. The dark colours show the services that have a strong impact on our outcomes. The light colours have some impact, and while the blanks have little or no impact. You can see really clearly how our services are cross-cutting, and each service is contributing to multiple outcomes. You can also see that each outcome is impacted by at least 3, often more services. And this demonstrates how our services integrate so well across the organisation to contribute to improved outcomes. It's also interesting to note on the left-hand side, the regulatory framework service has an impact on almost all of our intended outcomes. And so this highlights the span of influence of the regulatory framework service. As we progress through, I just wanted to take a moment to show how we're using the impact framework with a worked example of how we can use the different parts of the impact framework to contribute to improved outcomes using our compliance service as an example. Firstly, a model you might be familiar with, the intervention logic. There should be context at the bottom there that'll pop up later. But context informs our inputs, which produces our outputs, which contributes to the outcomes. So the intervention logic is sort of the basic premise that sits underneath the impact framework here. In this example, the context for compliance services includes regional plans, national direction, consent conditions and mana whenua aspirations. And so this informs how we shape the inputs, how we're tasking staff, and how we use our resources and our budget to deliver our compliance services, which are the outputs. We have service measures for compliance performance, but it's also important to recognise that the service measures only measure a small part of our services, and the breadth of our compliance services are much broader than the scope of the service measure. The impact of compliance services is to enable resource users to be compliant. So if we do compliance well, we'll see reduced risk of environmental harm, which should result in improved outcomes. So if the plans and policies are working and we have resource users enabled to be compliant, we should see strong impact on the environmental regulation and protection outcomes.
I've just got a question there from Councillor.
No, let her finish this because she's sort of touching on something.
Okay, I thought you were getting itchy there.
So a strong impact on the environmental regulation and protection outcomes, and some impact on the community preparedness and response to hazards. Just drilling down in a bit more detail, a specific example of this relates to the compliance service measure 15, which is a percentage of resource users improving their compliance status in a set of targeted categories. So staff looked at the outcomes to guide the selection of the categories for the service measure. So in order to improve outcome A, which is the health and wellbeing of water bodies and freshwater ecosystems, specifically the measures for nitrates in groundwater and E. coli in rivers and streams, one of the categories staff are focused on is compliance in drinking water protection zones. The compliance goal is that resource users within drinking water protection zones either have consent and are operating according to consent conditions, or are operating according to regional plans, i.e. permitted activity rules. So if we achieve the goals of the compliance program and all activities in the drinking water protection zones are compliant, then we would expect to see an improvement in the health and wellbeing of water bodies and freshwater ecosystems in the catchment, including water and drinking water supplies.
Well, Ian.
So just, if I could ask you a question, because I think it goes to exactly what you're talking about at the moment, but especially when I read down through the regulatory framework column, and there are a lot of dark blue, so you've got a strong impact. I wouldn't disagree with that, but I'm not sure that the strong impact is always positive. Sometimes the strong impact is because we get in the way of regulations, get in the way of the outcomes we're looking for. So have you thought about that in the way you've done this? Because if you read this chart, you think, oh, well, the dark colours are good, we're getting everything right, when in fact some of the impacts we're having are probably counterintuitive or counter to the outcomes we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. I think the purpose of this chart is for us to recognise the potential, the power, or the ability to influence that. And to your point, either in a positive way or a negative way, but for us to recognise that these services are the services we need to focus on in order to make changes in those outcomes. So when we're looking at how are we shaping those services, how are we developing our priorities, we've got the outcome and the target in mind and working towards what we've determined to be improved outcomes in that space. Yeah. Great. It's also worth noting that each outcome measure is different in terms of the time period over which we'd expect to see change, the influence that we, Environment Canterbury, can have on the outcome, who we're working with to affect the change, and the external context. And so if we're not seeing outcomes improving in line with our expectations, then we can use the model to assess what needs to change. Staff will be developing feedback loops that will help us to assess the context, the inputs, the outputs, and change our contribution where necessary. Thank you. So moving into our outcome measures and how we're reporting our outcome measures, we've been testing and refining the outcome measures and methodologies to ensure that they're accurate, replicable, and easy to understand. And it can be challenging as data comes from a variety of sources, some internal, external, some are updated at different frequencies and require a range of processes to analyse, interpret and produce a result. Some of these measures are already in use, but we've had to develop methodologies for others, and so we're also mindful of external changes that might undermine the measures, and we've tried to anticipate these potential changes and future-proof. Developing baselines for comparison has been complex, and for some data sets it wouldn't be appropriate to just report last year's results. Some baselines recognise trends over 10 years, geographical distribution and plan limits, so staff have been working carefully to ensure baselines are scientifically appropriate to draw insights, enduring as data changes over the years, and easy to understand for our community. This year we've been focused on getting the methodologies right, as once we've established a methodology and a baseline, we don't want to be making unnecessary changes. Each outcome measure will have a baseline or an appropriate comparison so we can track progress of each measure towards our targets. The comparator will be included in the final draft annual plan, which councillors will receive ahead of deliberations. In terms of reporting back, the communications and engagement team have been preparing a web-based destination and designing how users will navigate our outcomes and measures and learn more about the enduring changes we want for our environments and communities. Each outcome measure will be supported with information on why this is important, how we're tracking in our work, and the work that we are doing to make a difference. Each year, we'll include a summary of results for each outcome measure in the annual report, and a more detailed information will be available on our website. Web-based reporting provides the flexibility and allows us to add links and relevant data or reporting that complements the set of measures we've chosen. So next steps, we'll come back to Council in August with more information and examples of the final suite of outcomes reporting. We'll ensure that councillors are fully briefed on the full set of outcome measures and our inaugural results before it goes live in September. We'll also ensure that our Papatipurunga partners receive these results before they go live. In the annual plan 2025-26, there'll be some very minor edits to outcome measures as a result of the work that we have done in developing the methodologies, and we're intending to use these measures for the first 3 years of reporting. As part of the next LTP, the long-term plan 2027-37, we'll be able to draw on the first reports and feedback to review the outcomes and measures. Any significant changes will be workshopped with councillors ahead of the next long-term plan.
And can I just say in conclusion, when we set the outcome measures, we really didn't know what we were getting into. And Trudy's worked very strongly across the organisation and has found lots of wrinkles. It's not a simple thing to do. And I think you'll see an iteration coming through as we work through it, because what we might have thought might be an easy outcome to try and get some data has proved in some cases to be quite difficult. So you'll see that come through as Trudy and the team bring back the information. So over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for doing this. It's data is what I say, and one of the questions that I had at the start of this presentation was what was the baselines being made and when we would get to see those, which is you've answered really well. So thank you so much for that. And the work that I see happening here in regards to the RMA reforms that are coming through, I just pulled out my piece of paper because the RMA reforms is talking about national bottom lines and national limits, and we're doing this work in terms of the impact framework, which is kind of the direction that's going. Is there any opportunity that, because you said you don't want to be doing these again, which is fair, is there any opportunity that we have at the moment to influence some of the work that's going on at MFE around this work, measuring those baselines, understanding what is measurable? You've just said that some of them are hard to measure. Is there any learnings that we have so that we can influence in that space so that we don't have to replicate?
That's a good point, and it's something we can explore with the MFE. I mean, I think when we set the outcome measures with you, they were things that we knew that you agreed with the direction we wanted to see in the environment, and they're not tied to numbers or anything. They're like an increasing or decreasing. So they're really, for us, they were set as targets across a broad range. But I think a conversation with MFE around the learnings that we have would be useful. So, thanks.
Yeah, I think that would be quite good. And then the other question I had was if compliance is removed in terms of a future scenario that we may have, where does that look? Everything here is very interlinked. I'm quite curious at what you think potentially that might mean in regards to how we measure the front end, because I think that could get quite tricky.
I think it's probably quite hard to predict, but I think that, Trudy's talked about the iterative process of this. While we don't want to be rethinking the outcome statements every year, we're obviously, as in all the work that we're doing, we're keeping an eye to the future and what that means and where our influence is and where our ability to lever is. And I think staff will keep an eye on that. So no specific answer to that, but
it's good that you're keeping an eye on it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of change, but this is really good work, and so thank you so much for it. Has you got any questions from councillors?
Not a question, but a comment really, and I just think that the way that's laid out is really helpful around how each of the outcomes actually touches on so many of the programs within our work. So thank you for that.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. I think the no questions there means that you've done a really good job, and it is really useful. And it's
I
very
have
helpful.
a question.
Oh, sorry,
I
Councillor
have a
Edge. I didn't
question,
see you.
Leroy.
Sorry.
No, you don't have to see me. You have to hear me. Look, I've just a comment really. I know that those outcomes that we looked at, we obviously discussed them, but looking at the list again this morning, how do we, going forward, we may need to add a few more outcome measures that we think are sort of lacking in that list that we've got. And I presume that that we won't do that obviously immediately. But I mean, the things that struck me were there's no real reference to coastal environmental health. There's nothing really in terms of issues around outstanding natural landscapes and significant natural areas. And I'm just wondering where we seem to be a bit weak on biosecurity issues. And so what's your thoughts there, Catherine, on adding to that list, perhaps, and when would that happen?
The biosecurity, I know, is captured under our role in that is in one of the service measures is looking to that. I know when we set this up with you, we tried to keep it to a manageable number so that we didn't set ourselves up for something that we couldn't actually deliver on. So there was a conversation around how many and what was the most important things. But certainly, I think, Trudy, you were saying through the long-term plan, that would be a useful time, which is sort of, dare I say, 18 months away, would be a useful time to revisit that because, as we said, we didn't want to be changing them all the time, but we're certainly, as you mentioned, Dion, things are changing in the environment and we need to respond to that. Yeah.
Just a supplementary question then. You talked about trying to ensure over this last while to ensure the methodology that you were developing is the right sort of methodology. And thinking forward in terms of potential changes and responsibilities of the regional council, or do you think the methodologies you've developed already can potentially be more bespoke in terms of how things are measured on a catchment basis?
Do you want to answer that, or shall I? Yeah. You didn't, my microphone was still on when I was asking Trudy. I guess the reason I went back to go forward was because we set these up in 2023 and the environment, as you've noted around the table, is changing, and so we will have to keep our eye out on the future. The methodology is that Trudy's been working through with the team has been based on those outcome measures that we have here. So we would need to then, when new outcome measures are set, look again at what that methodology was in terms of going forward.
Councillor Edge, I believe the Chief Executive wanted to have a say.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I just wanted to add that I've got confidence in the staff being mindful of what's coming, but at the same time providing continuity in what we have at the moment. If we muck about too much right now, we're not going to have a stable platform for doing this. And we're certainly keeping our eye on those changes, Councillor Edge. You'll be aware that SNAs, amongst other things, are signalled in terms of national direction and the like. And I guess what I'd like to do is make sure that ratepayer dollar is focused on the things that we know when we know it, and that we adjust as and when is appropriate. And I think that next LTP process will be when we revisit that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, no, I agree. It's kind of like, we're going down the track at the moment. Let's not change, but be aware of those things coming up that could potentially create some good discussion next year.
Thanks, Councillor Edge. Did you? Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, I just want to add another comment on there. I think what we're talking about here, these sorts of changes, they're changes in the context. If you think back to that diagram, it's the context at the bottom that's changing. And so our role, the way that we're tasking our staff, the way that we're delivering our services, and when we look at the outcomes, this is the changes that we want to see in the environment. We don't have a compliance outcome. We have what's the quality of the water, what's the quality of the Indigenous biodiversity. And so, in fact, using the outcomes that we have will help us to understand what's the impact of that change to our context, and then be a greater lever for us to be able to describe that impact.
Councillor Robinson?
Oh, thank you for that. With just regards to the sheet, specifically nitrates and E. coli, just for clarity, we won't be covering detail on how much something has decreased with specific to those two elements of nitrates and E. coli. I just think that, for everything else, increasing or decreasing is, consistent with where we're going. But I think for the detail of that, I think maybe rather than just putting a baseline for sites or site-specific, we need detail-specific to see if it's actually, I guess, aligning with our goals for the regional plans and things. So percentage of decrease for nitrates and percentage of decrease in E. coli, as well as the site-specific wells and things like that. I think we really need to cover that. And are we?
These measures here are really important to us. We recognise the criticality of getting that right. So this is one that we're still working through the methodology and considering the points that you've raised. We're considering how accessible that data is, what level of analysis is required, what the appropriate baseline is, and then how do we provide that granularity that you've described.
Just sort of a wee bit of clarity around what I'm trying to require is that some consents and some rules within the regional plan, the Land and Water Regional Plan, require us to, or consent holder to prove that a certain percentage of the nitrate levels or pollutants are decreasing over the time period of their consent. So we need that detail anyway. So I'm just wondering if the nitrate and E. coli content could be really specific to how much it decreased, and I think that's quite important. That's just my comment.
Yeah.
Oh.
Trudy has been working very closely with the science team around just those questions that you're asking, because it's a very difficult. We've had conversations about. I know how that thinking's very progressing. Yeah.
Councillor Mackenzie.
I guess the counter to that discussion is, where do economic and social outcomes sit within this framework? Are they considered as values to which you're working towards in general, and therefore you don't need to talk about them, or are they specific outcomes that you need to use to balance some of the environmental outcomes you're looking at? Because there appears to be a bit of a hole in the thing if those things aren't considered, recreational opportunities, and I guess a lot of those are focused too much on the environmental outcomes. You might, the answer is, well, we shut down all industry and kick everybody out of Canterbury and we can get the right outcomes for some parameters. But actually, if nobody's allowed to live here, what's the point? Yeah. You don't have to answer it now. You could.
No, but I'm very aware that the economic side is not reflected well in the outcome statements, I think, and that's something I think we could get better at over time.
Are there any other questions of councillors? No? Okay, so thank you so much for your time and for presenting this. Again, it's very useful. Looking forward to seeing those baselines when they do come, and seeing how we can start measuring them against our targets. I think our next briefing is at 11 o'clock, the public transport update. So we've got 15 minutes until that starts. So go grab a cup of coffee and we'll come back. Kia ora, everybody. We've got back to another briefing on public transport at the... I've just heard myself and I sound absolutely terrible. That's very scary. I'm so sorry for everybody who has to listen to me. Oh my goodness. And we've got at the end of the table, we've got Derek, Dan, and Sonia. I was just having a brain meltdown then. I was just like, I was reading here and it was like, that's not Giles. Oh, heck. And we should not have breaks in between briefings. Okay, so I'll pass it on. How would you like to run the briefing? Do you just want to run through the sections and then have questions, or would you like questions throughout?
Yep, so we're going to follow our kind of standard format now, which is we'll take the slides as read, and then we'll just come to some key points and talk through any questions or any comments that we have.
Okay, I'll leave it over to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so the safety team trial. I'm going to be pretty brief on this, I think. So Sonia, if you wouldn't mind fast forwarding to slide 7 for me, which is a nice graph. For me, to a great extent, this slide kind of says it all. Back in late 22, we'd been for a large period of disruption with COVID and then the driver shortage, missed trips, etc. As our network got back to normal, we saw a serious escalation in the number of incidents reported. That progressed into 2023 and the trajectory was pretty bad. We kicked off in 2024 looking a lot worse until the point at which we implemented the safety team. So with the exception of the blip of July, every month after the implementation of that team, the number of incidents reported by the public and our operators has fallen. And looking at the start of 2025, that trajectory is continuing. So we seem to have reversed the bad trajectory that we were on. March in that is not a complete month, so that's a little bit more optimistic than it should be. So what I need to add to this as well, the incidents reported by the security team themselves, they report more incidents than we've ever seen before. They're attending a lot more low-level stuff on the network that would otherwise go unreported or undetected. And we think what's happening there is you're getting the antisocial behavior, a quiet word from a trained member of the safety team who's really good at de-escalation, just kind of nips it in the bud, and that prevents it becoming something more serious, which then ends up being reported by the public because it's become serious. A big part of the success and a big thing we've focused on is the retention of staff in this team and extensive training. The safety team do more than just respond to incidents. They act as ambassadors for our network. We've deployed them to support with events. We've deployed them to support with disruption at the interchange. We've had them in the past jumping on and off buses, putting posters up to say bike racks are finishing or being banned. There's kind of a multitude of extra things we've been able to do with this team throughout the trial. So ultimately, if you want to go to my last slide, Sonia, our staff recommendation is that we should make the team permanent. We've currently got budget for the next for years 2 and 3 of the LTP, so there's no additional rates impact of doing this. There would be an impact beyond year 3 where additional budget would be required. That's it from me.
Oh, okay. Oh, excellent. Any questions on this part, Councillor Mackay?
Yeah, thanks for this. You'll probably recall I didn't support this funding this previously, given that it's a council decision. That's fine, I accept that now. But the security presence that we initially agreed to is certainly diversified into other functions. Are we thinking about renaming this team that we've now employed? I am feeling, and perhaps rightly so, that we've invested a considerable amount of time and money in getting a team of people doing their job and training them, as you've pointed out. So doesn't seem fair and proper that you just chop them off at the knees and let them go, because I don't think that's intention or a desire. But maybe we just need to be thinking about, well, is the safety team, and I saw them in action not in action, but they were certainly in the bus depot last night when we came back after dark, with, therefore obviously to de-escalate or to not have problems. So I'm just wondering if we need to actually be thinking about a new name for them. And the other question is, are they basically focused just within Christchurch City, or do we see them going to Selwyn District and Waimakariri District as well?
I guess with regard to the name of the team, 98% of their role is safety and security. It's that remaining 2% that we've kind of leveraged them to do a few other things we've needed to do. That said, I'm not adverse to a different name. Currently, the main focus is on Christchurch City. That's where the majority of our incidents occur. So we do change deployment every now and then, and that is really based on the feedback we get from our operators and the incident reports we're getting in. So we direct the team to go to the hotspots, and currently those hotspots are not really out in the districts.
Councillor, have you got another question?
Yes, I'm just wondering, from a rating perspective, how's that incorporated within our rates based on presuming the ratepayers are paying for that service? Is that part of...
One question from Councillor Cromwell, and then we'll go to Councillor Davies.
Kia ora, Claire. Did you mention, you said that you'd like to see the name changed because it says safety team? Is that what you meant? Sorry, I was just...
Yeah, I just wondered, given that we're now giving them other roles, initially when we were a council and we looked at voting them in and spending the roughly $1 million on them in the first year, it was around safety and security for bus people. And I thought they were going to be on the bus all the time. But we now know that they're spending a lot of time in bus exchanges, the two big bus exchanges, and doing some other work as staff have pointed out. So I'm just wondering whether we need to broaden that. That was where I was coming from that perspective.
I mean, great question, I suppose, over to staff. Is it thoughts on that at all?
Is it related?
Yeah, I guess to clarify, the team do spend the majority of their time on the buses. When you see them in the interchange, that is them passing through the facility. Obviously, almost all the routes go through the interchange, so you do see them there quite a lot. But we have only ever deployed them purposefully in the interchange at times when our systems are down to support passengers, or as I mentioned, to stick posters up when we were struggling with the 3-day space between having bike racks, daylight running, and then no racks.
So then I ask, who would have I been seeing there last night with security, first security guys in the bus exchange? Are they CCC staff?
No, that will be our team. They interchange between services a lot in the bus exchange, so they are there throughout the day, swapping from one bus to another. And obviously in the late evening, our frequency is a bit lower, so they tend to have a longer period between jumping off one bus and onto the next bus. But we do not deploy them there specifically. And the reason for that is that CCC are responsible for the security in that passenger space of the interchange.
Councillor Burns, was this related?
Yeah, it was. I was going to ask something similar about them being on the buses and the bits and pieces, but I won't ask it because you kind of answered it. Thank you.
So I've got Councillor Davies, Mackenzie, Ward, and then Edge.
So do you think over time, as it gets as we get more data on it and it gets a bit more mature, do you think that it will get more targeted around hotspots?
To the extent that we can, yes. We continue to refine where we put the team. The challenge we have is it's only 8 people. When all of them are on, it's only 8 people across the entire network. So we are a bit limited on how much targeting we can do. Obviously, if they're on bus, they may be passing through some hotspots on the route, and the bus itself and that particular trip might be a hotspot. And sometimes we'll deploy them to off-bus locations like Eastgate, where we get problems at the interchange facility.
Mackenzie.
Thank you, Swags.
Councillor Mackenzie.
When I looked at this paper, I thought, well, what are the alternatives other than having a safety team riding the buses? And they're clearly having a significant effect. I guess the only alternative would be to ban people under the age of 30, would it? Or, you know, you know, what are the alternatives? But are there any alternatives?
I'll be perfectly honest. I don't know. We couldn't think of any at the time that we chose to. Well, I mean,
you don't have
there
to.
There are things we can do with technology and broadcasting CCTV. Would it be as effective? Probably not. So that wasn't quite where I was going. I struggle to think of any.
All right, Councillor Ward.
Some of the questions have been answered, but just adding to what Joe has said, can we recognise the hotspots? And point of clarification, you said 8 staff. Is that 8 staff per shift or 8 staff total? Because it'd be 2 shifts a day, is that correct?
It's 8 staff in total over a day. So most of our incidents occur towards the end of the school day. So in effect, we have 1 or 2 staff on from the morning. And then by mid-afternoon, we have all 8 on. And then again, it drops into the evening as the shifts end.
Have you got a follow-on question?
That seems a lot of money for 8 staff.
It is 7 days a week, 365 days a year, ish. I don't think we deployed anyone on Christmas Day because I don't think we get many incidents on Christmas Day. But it's a big time commitment from staff to cover the running of our network, which is basically every day of the year.
Councillor Ward?
Sorry, one more question. So would we be better to outsource it to a security firm?
They are.
They are. Right, sorry.
Councillor Edge.
This is a really good success story, and I'm pleased that in the end Council agreed to proceed with this. Your data collection is excellent, and just having that safety team do their core work on at 98% of the time is what you were saying, and the results are pretty significant, really. And I really like the idea that you're also picking up on slide 8 the monthly incident reports and the fact that the safety team is being pretty on the ball in terms of helping deliver or reduce any issues and deflate any issues really early on by the sound of things. So, and of course, they will become more and more valuable as we end up having the Metro Stadium come alive in the next wee while. And the amount of people coming in and out of the city, I think, will be a lot more during evening times as well. So I think it's really good to have them on site, and it just sounds like it's working really well. Thanks.
Councillor Dice.
Yes, kia ora. Just curious if the staff themselves have been queried about their role and how it's changed and adapted. If there's been any feedback from them, I've seen roles where people are hired for something like security or whatever, really, and then they're shifted to do other things, and that can cause some conflict. Not being not having been originally hired for that. So just curious if they've been queried.
We certainly haven't had any adverse feedback from the team. We've got a really good relationship with them, and at times when they have been deployed on other duties, they've been deployed alongside our members of staff, so we're working in partnership with them. I guess one of the things to note here, if you take, so there's two examples that come to my mind where we've used them for other things. One is around the fireworks. Ultimately, we're delivering an operation with our staff on the roadside, and part of the security team's role there is to keep our staff safe. So they'll also assist passengers, but they do enable our staff to get on with our jobs by providing that security function. The other one I spoke about was the wonderful 3 or 4 day period where we went from bike racks to daylight running to no bike racks. There's actually a really big safety component in that we needed to communicate as best as we could, as quickly as possible to people, that there were restrictions and then there were no racks. A failure or inability to communicate as well as we could would lead to more conflict with drivers. So there's a kind of security, a preemptive element, I would say, in that area. And the team were and have been and continue to be really proactive when we do ask them to do other things. So, for example, they were making sure no one could get into the bus exchange with a bike and not leave with a leaflet telling them when bike racks were going to be restricted. So certainly not had any adverse feedback from the team, and they've responded really well when we've asked them to do these things. So my gut feeling, without any evidence to put in front of you, is that they are quite happy with what we're asking them to do.
Any other questions? I've got a question I wanted to ask. Or did you have one, Councillor Robinson?
Just with regards to the sort of anecdotal evidence of being a deterrence, is there any way that we could, your team could potentially make that into more of an evidence-based approach rather than just anecdotal? What would need to happen in order to obtain that data that it's minimising further events or crime? Or
unfortunately, I think that's impossible. I guess the key to a deterrence is that the issue doesn't happen, so we don't know about it. It is really, really hard to quantify that impact. We get it through in anecdotal reporting, but I don't think we could ever make it a hard, quantifiable, measurable piece.
Have you got a follow-on question? Okay, well, I've got a question I wanted to ask around the budget. This was $1 million this financial year, is that correct?
1.2, I think.
Oh, 1.2 was it? Because I'm just looking at the jump in the year 3 budget there from 1.3 to 1.8. Now, later in the paper, we're talking about a 5% inflation for PT, and there's a conversation around that anyway. But 1.3 to 1.8 is not 5%. Is there any reason why that's quite a significant jump?
That's looking at potentially increasing the resource, so i.e. having more people on the network.
Okay, so, and what's the evidence to require, that's supporting that at this stage?
So we'd be able to provide that before year 3, so we'd look at presenting that through the annual plan deliberations.
Next?
Yeah, following.
Okay. Councillor Mackay?
Yeah, look, I agree with that sentiment around the anecdotal evidence and getting some proof. I mean, my calculations at 1.8 mil works out at about 5k a day for that providing that service of safety, security, whatever we're talking about. Have we looked at actually providing that service by ourselves through Metro, because that seems very, that if you put that over 8, that you average that over 8 people working the whole time, that's $632 a person. So if you work that on an hourly rate, that's quite high. Have we actually looked at providing that rather than contracting that service out?
We haven't to date. Obviously, we wanted to launch this pretty quickly once the trial was signed off. We've got a 1+1+1 contract in place, so we're rolled over into the first +1 now. We have an extra 1 year that we can roll over. So the opportune time to look at that would be, I think, when that contract is due to expire and we have a choice: do we go back out to procurement or do we do this a different way?
I'd just like to think that it does come back to us for a council discussion at that time. Thank you.
I think that's a good signal. Did you have another question, Councillor Ward? I was doing the same numbers as well, so which is why I asked the question.
Struggling to see the 5%.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I'd support what you've got on the board there, 1.3, 1.8 in year 3. If it's in a budget, then it's easy to handle. If you have to come back to us for that, it makes it more difficult. I think that we've proved that the safety people that you've got on board are doing the right job and acting as the right deterrent. And as the busyness increases, then, the resource may need to increase also. And so I would disagree with my 2 colleagues down the other end of the table there about this, because when we did go through this process, we were pretty much pushed into it, the requirement to do it, because of the effect that a lack of security was having on not only passengers but also bus drivers. Putting bus drivers at risk is not something that we should be doing, and ensuring the health and safety of passengers and bus drivers, I think from my point of view, it's money well spent.
Okay, I think we'll move on to the next part. Have you got one more question? I think, Councillor Ledice, you've already asked your question, haven't you? Or have you got another one?
No, sorry, that's just left the hand up.
Okay, we'll continue on to the next section.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Dan Daly toke ingoa. So this relates to the Community Vehicle Trust deputation you've previously engaged with, and really looking at the mahi that our volunteers across the region do in this space. We have got a recommendation to do some groundwork in terms of understanding what the needs are for the community vehicle trusts across the region, and wanting to make sure that any recommendation that we put through to council in terms of monetary figures is not just a wet finger in the air, and it is more of an evidence-based summation of what funds would make a difference, what is needed and what is required, and also looking at the essentially what the business model is that each of the community vehicle trusts operate under, so bringing in the structure to support them properly. We believe that this can be wrapped up with the next iteration of the annual plan through next year, or as part of the long-term plan, depending on the priority that it's placed under. And that will enable us to look at those figures so that you can have those engagements with your communities around what could be a targeted rate increase or not, and then move forward to implement whatever the recommendations are.
And also it's worth noting, following the draft Regional Public Transport Plan, NZTA are looking into, because at the moment you'll see from the slides that it's funded 60% through an NZTA contribution. They're actually reviewing this at the moment, so they're looking at the eligibility for the NLTP funding. So this timeline will give us the opportunity to work with NZTA to confirm how this should work going forward.
Ready for questions?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, we'll go to, we've got Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Scott, then Councillor Sunkel.
Yeah, thanks for the update on this. I'm having trouble reconciling the figure tables that you've given with the draft annual plan. Does it come from this draft annual plan, or are these figures from the previous year one?
Yes, those will be from the annual plan.
Microphone.
So I noticed that in the long-term plan that we pulled out in the draft annual plan, there's a constant decline of how much we are actually collecting. So I'm not surprised that we hear a lot of concern from our community vehicle trust. I know I do in Oxford, Rangiora, and North in Huranui as well. And so I definitely support us looking at this. In the long-term plan, we had something like 10,000 being collected from targeted ratepayers for Temuka, and then it's suddenly gone down to 5,000 or 4,987 to be precise in the draft, which I'm presuming is GST inclusive. Why was that? Why is that? And the other question, I guess, is it the NZTA portion that actually dictates how much the 40% is? Because I thought the targeted amount was actually in consultation with the community when these were formed.
I'm afraid some of those questions we're going to have to take away and talk to our finance business partner just to confirm the figures, so we'll be able to come back to you. In terms of the targeted rate pays for the 40% Environment Canterbury contribution, yeah, so at the moment 60% is covered through the NLTP. As I stated, NZTA will be reviewing that in terms of eligibility.
So for clarity, does NZTA have an envelope for Canterbury which says I'm only going to fund $2,222.500, and therefore we then have to work out if that's 60% of it, what the other 40% is, or do we go and say we've got this targeted area, we're collecting this amount of ratepayer from it, therefore this is what you need to pay?
These figures have been set in stone quite some time ago, so you'll see that there hasn't been any changes. So it isn't that NZTA has set that budget. We've kind of...
Well, I needs a bit of digging into, because it didn't take me very long last night to see some quite significant differences. So I really would like that clarified. Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I think the deputation that came to us from Waimate Community Vehicle Trust, it's a bit more complicated than at first sight, because what things they do, they also do total mobility down there, and they have so they were looking to replace a vehicle and needed capital to replace the vehicle so that you didn't have to have a service license to operate it, which gives them more flexibility. And I think talking to the local runanga, that's about to happen, but they've been captured also by total mobility and the increase in use of total mobility, and the local community services people who do their, if you like, their bookwork, their cost has gone up almost double, and so they're saying, hey, we can absorb some of this, but we can't absorb all of it. So there's a couple of things there that are happening. I don't think all community vehicle trusts are the same, because I know the Pleasant Point one's still reasonably happy and don't complain about anything really, but I don't know if we can do anything, or whether that sits with that Waimate community, although NZTA is reviewing the rules around total mobility. I understand, but so that's that. And the other thing, just to explain the other thing, because I met with these people, the other thing was the person that was running the community vehicle trust left and took a lot of intellectual property with her and didn't share it back. So it's a bit of a red, it's not a red herring, but it's a bit different. So any reaction to what their problem is needs to be considered, I guess, in terms of in light of what you already said, but also in light of all the other vehicle trusts around the place. Yeah, community. Yeah.
Well, I actually have a question on the base of that, Peter. I wrote down there, when we were told that total mobility costs have gone up, and we're just getting told you need to put another $1.5 million in your plan, or it might be 1.2 or whatever it is. $1.2 million into your annual plan, but I kind of feel like we're getting told here that we got to go to consultation to increase the costs or increase the funding here. So what's the difference between these two schemes? One's we just get told the $1.2 million increase, and we're talking about $222,000 here for all of these other community trusts. Is there a difference between the two?
With total mobility, we've got evidence around how the consumption's tracking, so we know how much that's going to cost. Here, we don't have the evidence to say this vehicle trust should have X amount of dollars, this vehicle's trust should have X amount of dollars. We don't have that information available yet. So that's the work we need to do to understand how much more and what the value would be in terms of us rating those communities. And it's often smaller communities, so every step change can be quite extensive. And obviously we want the backing of the community as well. So we just don't have that data available at the moment to be able to say, yep, if we rated people an extra X amount of dollars, it would give us this value. We don't have that yet.
Okay. Councillor Sunkel?
Yeah, thank you for this, and I'm very pleased that we are reviewing, having spent a number of years in those conversations when the grouping comes in. And I think actually tried to use the service myself the other day, and it was booked up, and my brother-in-law was driving. It was very awkward, but he couldn't take me to hospital, so it really annoyed me. It was a shame, but it goes to show the time and the requirements of rural communities without bus services. We talk about total mobility within the context of urban, but those community services are in effect the equivalent of within the rural communities of transferring through from wherever to wherever and at a reasonable price. And I think from what we've kind of hear, the majority of folk using those services are happy to pay the $20, $30, $40, $50 if that's what it costs to get them in and out. It's just how do we ensure that the infrastructure and their cost lines don't just keep increasing or taken account of. And I know in previous conversations that the group itself will shuffle vehicles going, we're going to buy a new wheelchair capable, and the folks down the line go, we don't, but we would really like the second-hand one. So these things go round in circles within the community. So while they're independent, they also work together quite well in providing services and vehicles along. So, yeah, just really pleased that we are looking at that because all of us in our lives know over the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, cost increases and the like have been astronomical, and they're still sitting at the same space. So thank you.
Any other questions on this? Okay, we'll move on to the next section.
This slide really is just a high-level overview of some items, and we'll be coming back to you in May. So you'll see there, this is items that will come through the annual plan deliberations. So there is an option that we could look at inflation, which we've kind of mentioned already. At the moment, we put in 5%. NZTA have put 3% in, so we've changed their portion, but we have the opportunity to do so from the long-term plan. We also could look at removing funding for the EV replacement and infrastructure, and you'll see the figures there around the potential targeted rate reduction. We'll also be coming back to you with a proposal around some additional funding for events response from PT reserves. And in May, we'll be coming to you with a decision around the fares increase from July. That's something we've briefed council on before, so this will be the decision paper.
Any questions from councillors on this? No? Okay, so what we'll do is that we'll end this briefing here. After this, we've got another briefing, but we'll turn it off the live stream. Thank everybody for the